Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Diorama. Diorama is a Swedish romantic drama that tells the story of Bjorn and Frida, a married couple whose relationship starts with passion before fast-forwarding 10 years into the future where they're married and have a family of 3 kids. It's during this seemingly happy time of their lives that the relationship begins to unravel. As the marriage falls apart, the steps and potential reasoning behind each character's actions are explored through interpretive diorama sequences. Throughout all of this, the movie examines the possibility of whether the two can create a new path together or if their relationship is about to come to an end. I like what this movie is going for in terms of its overall concept and the themes surrounding its story, but in terms of execution, it ended up being a mixed bag for me. It starts off really strong, but over time it loses steam to the point where it becomes another ordinary marriage breakdown story. The first character, Bjorn, is a bit disconnected from his family in that he isn't fully involved in the day-to-day aspects like cooking, cleaning, and pretty much any other household responsibility one can think of, and this understandably upsets his wife. He isn't very sympathetic in this regard, but one could chalk it up to him simply being worn out by the rigors of marriage. He's very much a free spirit at heart, especially as the movie builds toward this cross-country motorcycle trip that he plans to take with friends, so it ultimately makes sense as to why he resents feeling restricted and being pulled away from his passion. By comparison, Frida is virtually the complete opposite of Bjorn, with how much more involved she is in their family's affairs. Because of this, she has less time and freedom to do what she wants, while having little help in bringing up their children. I found her character a lot more enjoyable, at least in the beginning. She goes through a much more evident struggle, which helped me connect to her better, and in general she felt more like a true protagonist, helping move the story along at a smoother pace, although as I hinted at, this is more so for the opening act and not as much later on. As one can imagine, the movie is focused on exploring the relationship and why it dissolves in the way it does. Most of it can be boiled down to the two being normal people who are driven apart simply by virtue of the fact that they have different values, and this offers a surprisingly realistic take on how relationships form and, more importantly, how they break apart. I like how the two eventually came to their tipping point with how distant Bjorn is with the family versus how immersed Frida is. One can tell that Frida is carrying the weight of 10 years of frustration on her shoulders, and it was satisfying to see her question the balance of their marriage more and more over time. I also like that both of them had their kids' best interests at heart. Even though they have an almost complete communication breakdown between each other, they respect each other's roles as parents and are able to cooperate at some level to provide for them, despite hating each other's guts. This also made me feel bad for the children for having to endure what they go through, from repeatedly changing places to suddenly not being able to afford food and proper bedding when they're with Frida. It goes to show how much of an impact divorce really has, not just on the adults of the family, but the children too. As enjoyable as the movie can be in parts in this regard though, it kind of falls off the rails once the marriage is on its way out. I found it difficult to sympathize with Bjorn and even Frida as the story went along because they both commit bad things to each other that would never be acceptable in a healthy relationship. There's a point halfway through the movie where the two have a big argument with each other, and before the audience knows it, things are officially over between them. It was so weird to see the movie have such excellent build-up to the marriage failing, yet completely botching the actual breakup over how rushed and tonally inconsistent it was. From that point on, the movie becomes a lot more mundane, with how long, protracted scenes of dialogue there are where the two either argue or just act passive-aggressive. While I can understand why they break up and could easily see this sort of situation happening in real life, it still doesn't make for an interesting watch. Both of them are partly in the right and partly in the wrong for their problems, as they both contribute to the marriage failing in different ways. So as much as I wanted to at times, I ultimately couldn't bring myself to care about them on a deeper level. It doesn't help that the romance between them was never really all that convincing. Other than a brief scene at the beginning, the audience has no context to go on regarding any happy memories that they likely would have shared together. It makes sense that the marriage failing would be the core focus of the story, but the lack of history behind the marriage itself leaves it lacking depth. In fairness, the marriage is used more as a prop than anything else to explore various ideas behind marriage as a concept, leading to the major attractions of the movie that are the dioramas. They serve as little breaks in between scenes that provide the audience some food for thought, and some of them are quite intriguing. Most of them are comedic in presentation, and admittedly it was pretty funny to see people dressed up as animals and expressing themselves in exaggerated fashion while acting as if what they're doing is 100% serious and completely normal. These dioramas help lighten the mood once the movie's actual plot starts to get a bit too heavy. The dioramas also examine numerous aspects of love and relationships, such as monogamy versus nature, societal influences on couples, and different behaviors that people engage in when they're in a relationship. None of it is exactly deep, but the majority of these dioramas do tie in well with what happens in the story. However, the dioramas also tended to slow the pacing of the story too. A large number of them are featured in the first 2 acts, and frequently interrupt the plot as it swaps from one sequence to another, and this often makes it hard to keep track of things in the actual story. I also have to question some of the points that are given in the dioramas themselves, as sometimes they either don't make sense or are just plain bizarre. There's one diorama where it's just a group of scientists and all they do is drop knowledge bombs on how people pair bond on a chemical level. I get that there's a scientific basis behind why love forms and breaks, but love is more than just science and data, and a lot of these dioramas are filled with it, which bored me to tears as they went on. It almost feels like a pseudo-documentary at times, which would have actually been interesting, but because it's a movie, the science stuff ends up feeling disconnected from the story at large. The supporting characters in the story don't add much to the conversation either. They mostly exist to reinforce Bjorn or Frida's points of view when the plot calls for emotional support for either of them, and outside of this, they don't serve much purpose. But wherever the characters were, the movie always did a good job at framing the state of Bjorn and Frida's relationship on a technical level. The sets and lighting always changed depending on the tone, becoming dull and grey when the two were at home together, or lively and colourful when they were away from each other. Out of all the themes the movie examines, the most prominent one is monogamy, and it considers how and why people chase after it. I like that this gives the movie a sense of direction to follow for its characters, but at the same time, it tries to reach further than it can grab. It feels like the movie is trying to paint all monogamous couples and those who prefer monogamy with a broad brush, and that most people are destined to pursue one monogamous relationship after another, and that they'll always be chasing after stability. There's just something about this reasoning and how vague and far-reaching it's presented that I can't get behind. Overall, Diorama is an okay romantic drama that's just as visually interesting as the type of object it gets its title from, but its substance can't match its style. If you like dramas that explore the concept of marriage and you want to see one do so in artistic fashion, you might enjoy checking this out. This was definitely one of the more unusual movies I've seen on Netflix, in both good ways and bad. It has a realistic love story and entertaining diorama sequences that start off strong, but over time it gets bogged down by its slow pacing and bland themes and characters, and thus turns out mediocre as a result. What did you think about this movie? Were you impressed by how it balanced its story and diorama scenes, or were you annoyed by them instead? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Diorama. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the live action remake of Disney's Pinocchio. Bye bye!